let's go ahead and record. Okay, so now this is, I think, an important lecture, to be honest. I'm just think it's one of the key ones because of the discussions that got started the other day. And I'm looking at this up and to the right model, and that's a business term, just so you know. Up and to the right means your profits are going up, you're growing. And if you're growing, that's great. If you stop growing, that's still okay, as long as your revenue is steady. If you start to fall, you better correct some things, right? Or you're gonna have to start laying people off and whatever. Well, our country's up and to the right. I mean, you guys heard about the last jobs report? Last month? Hired almost 1 million people around the country. The economy's coming back. Unemployment rate dropped. Up and to the right. Yeah, there's little dips here. Here was the last recession. My guess is when we see this all totally play out, there'll be a little dip here, and then we'll go right back up again. The problem here is simple. It's math. Do the math. You got a country with 1.5 billion people, a country with 325 million people. You have a country with 300 plus million people in the middle class. You have a country here with about 150 million people in the middle class. They have 1 billion people in the poorer class. We have probably 100 million people in the poorer class. It's math. They can put more people to work than we can. It's just math. It's called scale in business. If you don't hit a certain scale, there's certain things you can't do. You've got to grow you have got to be a certain size to do big things, right? Big companies, they reach scale. When they reach scale, they can do some amazing things that they couldn't do when they were smaller businesses. For example, can Costa Rica do what we can do? Guatemala? You know, those countries are falling apart, right? Big immigration crisis as a result. There's been a drought. There's been 2 hurricanes. There's drug lords down there just ripping those countries apart.
My country's going up.
What country you're talking about?
El Salvador.
El Salvador, tell us, please.
Yeah, the president that got elected, he's doing a lot of changes and it's helping out the countryside. Can't wait, so I could go back.
It's getting better in El Salvador.
Yeah.
And El Salvador has had its issues, hasn't it? It's been kind of scary at times. Costa Rica seems to be a little more stable, but El Salvador has been up and down. But the new President Nuevo, he's doing a better job, huh? That's good to hear. I wish Venezuela could say the same thing. That's a mess, isn't it? Most Americans don't pay much attention unless you have roots in Latin America. Don't pay attention to the politics down there. But we could do a whole semester just on that, couldn't we? All right, well, can El Salvador keep up? Not scale-wise, no, they can't. So they have to work as a group, a region, and the region's divided. Okay, well, now the other thing that got to me last week was the pessimism in all but one class. And that was that the country's failing, the country's bad, the country's this and that. And I'm going, huh? Americans are famous for their optimism, not their pessimism. So we got into the question, why are you so pessimistic? A couple of the classes, it was fascinating. And I'm just going to jump ahead here, is because they said that your generation, right, this is only a few students, I don't know how many feel the same way, but your generation is being blamed for all of this decline. Are we in decline? First of all, no, we're not. We're still up and to the right. We're not in decline. No way. But a lot of people feel that we've declined because other countries are growing too. And China, of course, now is going to become the big colossus. And by the way, India is going to be next. Wait for it. In fact, we're making deals with India right now and Australia to make more vaccine for us and for the rest of the world. India could be a center of vaccine production. They're the same situation. They got maybe 150 million people in the middle class, 1 billion people who need work. That country, man, you set up a business there, you can get high quality, very educated workers for next to nothing. Businesses are going to move there. And India is going to be the next big thing. It's going to be China, then India, and then, the things are going to continue to change. So because they're growing, we feel like we're failing. We're not. And then the other thing that so interested me about the comments is your generation, I'm talking about your age group, you can't be blamed for any of the things that have happened in this country so far. Why? Why can you not be blamed for anything that's happened so far? Yeah.
Well, we can't even vote yet.
There you go. It's pure and simple. The purpose of this class is to get you to vote, and and also hopefully you'll leave this class with a belief, a reasonable expectation that we should allow every citizen a chance to vote if they want it, so that we all have our voices heard. All men are created equal when it comes to the vote. Women, whatever race, religion, doesn't matter. That has not always been the case. The franchise is another term for the vote. You'll need to know this word. Franchise, women were not allowed to vote. Men kept them out for how long? Now, though, they got the vote in 19 what? What was the amendment?
19.
And 1920 was the first, so 1920, that's how you remember that one. This is when they got the right to vote. Now they're responsible. They couldn't be held responsible for anything that happened before that because they didn't have a say in who the president was, who the governors were, who the senators were, who the local officials are. You now know how important it is to look at your local officials and to vote for the right ones, because they're the ones that impact your lives more than anything else because of federal, what's the rest of the term? Federalism. Now listen, same thing in the Jim Crow South. Look at the pistols here and all this kind of stuff. To keep African Americans from voting until the Voting Rights Act 1964. And now in Georgia, they're trying to make it harder for people to vote, mainly people in urban areas. Well, wait a minute, who are those people? Look, Georgia surprised everybody. Flipped for Biden and elected for the first time in its history 2 senators that are Democrats, 1 African American, the first African American ever elected in Georgia, and the first Jewish person ever elected. And if you know anything about the history of the KKK, oh, so sorry, I almost tripped and killed myself. Let's put that underneath. Of the Ku Klux Klan, you know that they hated Catholics, they hated Jews, and they hated African Americans too, wanted to stop them all. The KKK starts after the Civil War as a vigilante terrorist group. Well, wait a minute. So you can't blame African Americans or other disenfranchised people for what was happening in the South until they got the vote. Then they're responsible. Then they have to step up and have a say, which they did in that last election. But Biden only won by about 15,000 votes in Georgia. If they can keep 15,000 people from voting, the election could have gone the other way. Whoa. The history of the United States has been a history of denying people the right to vote. That's been our history. Why do you think we needed a civil rights movement? Why did we have to have Bloody Sunday over the Pettus Bridge? Because they weren't even letting people, once they had the right to vote, they weren't letting them register. So the history of this country is not a history of expanding the vote, but in forces trying to continually suppress the vote so their side wins. And we've seen it happen on both political parties. It's not just one political party that's done that. It's been both political parties through history. So the battle in this country is making sure everyone has the right to vote. And I believe this, if you take a class like this, right here, and pass the state test, which by the way, everybody that's done all their study guides is doing so far. You've got a couple more questions coming up on the state test, and then you guys are done with that. But if you pass the state test, and it's a legitimate test where you actually understand how the government functions and so on, you understand what federalism is and why governors, you understand those things. You understand how a president's elected. We're not talking about the politics. We're not talking about being a Democrat or being a Republican or being independent. That has nothing to do with it. It's the structure of our government, how it works.
if you understand that and how important it is that you find the right people to lead you, then why don't we let you vote at age 16? How many think, raise your hand if you think you're capable of making a really good decision now on who the governor should be of Utah? How many don't think they could make a good decision? Okay, let's debate. This is great. We have 3 and 2. Brilliant. Okay, so those who think, why should we not have 16-year-olds vote? Take it. This is why I love this, is especially when we get, you know, a mix of opinions. So go ahead, start it out. Why don't you think 16-year-olds should have the right to vote?
I don't think we're quite mature. Like, yeah, we're mature, especially for like our generation, we're mature. But some of us are being like pushed by our parents, and so it's not what we think, it's what they think.
Interesting, because the other classes said that they're being pushed by their peers. You're the first person to say pushed by your parents. What's wrong with that, though? I mean, your parents have a good sense of things.
It's not always the same views as you. Like, they grew up in a completely different like generation than
Oh,
us.
so you're talking about that gap in time.
Yeah. So their
Yeah.
views aren't always the same as ours. And same with peers. Like, some of them, they're even being pushed by their parents, and then they're trying to push their peers to believe the things they do. Some not as much, but.
Well, I've got some interesting data on that I'll share with you in just a second. So that was really an interesting new take. Nate, why not? Why not let these 3 vote? They want to vote. They're ready.
I do think that it wouldn't be a problem if 16-year-olds vote. I just don't think that I would be able to vote.
Why?
I don't know. I'm just.
Can we all acknowledge that he's really smart and gets all this stuff? We all believe that. So why not trust your judgment?
I don't know. I've not been right on a lot of things. So.
Oh, well, maybe. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. That's a fair thing to say. I get it. Go ahead. Now, those of you who think you should be able to vote.
No,
But Nate, I'd give you to vote. I'd let you run for office, my friend. Huh? I trust you that much. Go ahead.
I think I'll change sides because just for biology and for learning about.
Hey, you can
neurons
differ and
stuff.
still be friends. That's one thing we've lost in America, right? You know, oh, you disagree with me, suddenly you're a communist. You know what I mean? How silly that is. You can disagree. She's gonna be okay with that, aren't you? Go for it.
Oh, no, because I went over biology and we learned once for, I think, 21. We'll have like.
Oh, yeah, this is interesting research.
Being able of like making a good decision and stuff, and right now people, that's why they say we're like adults that are 18 because it has a better pathway with the neurons and synapses. So
Actually, I think the stuff you're talking about comes in the early 20s, so 22, 23, 24. So why don't we just not let anybody vote till they're 25? I mean, if it's a function of 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds don't really get it, then why are we letting them vote in the first place? Let's go back to what it was, 21. Ah, that was a good one though, right? Good piece of information, interesting kind of thing to think about. So maybe we're letting people vote too young. Go for it.
Yeah, but we're allowed to vote at 18 because we can tie for our country at 18, so it's only fair.
Speak a little louder for me, would you?
So we can die for our country at 18, so it's only fair that we can vote.
Yeah, see, my sister was involved in that protest. She was a little older than me during the Vietnam War. You can die for your country, but you can't vote for the commander in chief. And that, boy, that's why that amendment passed that quick. It passed so fast. I mean, the logic of it was like, oh crap, you know, all those World War II veterans, 18, 19, 20, they couldn't vote. You know, they should be allowed to vote. How about this? How about if we only allow people under age 65 to vote? 16 to 64, you get a vote there. Once you turn 65, you can't vote anymore. Why isn't that a good idea? Yeah.
I feel like you're taking away their rights in a way. Like,
Yeah.
they should be allowed to vote. I mean.
By the way, they're the most reliable voter group. 65 and up turns out in a higher percentage than any other age group. Yeah?
Yeah.
But do they have as much at stake? Shouldn't the people that have 50 years as of those that have 5, 10, 20, shouldn't the people with the most to lose have the biggest say? Now flip it. So wait a minute, you wouldn't take it away from 65-year-olds, but the 16, 17, 18-year-olds maybe have more to lose by an outcome that they know their world will be different, but that's not being voted on. What's being voted on is, oh, hey, what worked in the past? Let's try that again. And older voters are more conservative than younger voters. That's just a fact. On your point, this was interesting, okay? When we first got the right to vote at 18, there was a gap between the kids and their parents around the beat no more and so on. But then it came right together, and it was exactly what you said up until 2008. And that's a long time, okay? We're talking 74 to 2008, where basically wherever your parents said, yeah, okay, I'll vote that way. In 08, it started to break apart. And in this last election, it broke apart even more. The gap between young people's version of things and the older people has just gone like that. I've seen it here. I mean, I've seen it here big time. You know, when I first 10 years I taught here, basically students politically were a reflection of the parents. You're not now. You're in a different place, and I don't know how to address it. You know, I'm an older person, right? So, hey, I want you to all vote like me, right? No, it's not fair, is it? So I don't know how to address that, but that's the date. I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm just saying until 08, pretty much. And by the way, 18 to 21 year old, lowest voter group of any age group. Yeah.
I think we should be allowed to vote from age 16 to 18 as long as you're employed, specifically for the reason that if you are employed, then you get taxed. If you're being
Wow, I love this one.
say what you're
No taxation without representation. And if you're working at 16 and up, you should have a chance to vote. Would you count school as work though?
no,
Because you're not being taxed. I think you're making a very, can I just compliment you on this? A very interesting constitutional argument rooted in history that now listen to me carefully. Your comment this morning, first, I've never heard that one before. And I've never heard this argument made ever in 15 years. All right, well, Senator Warnock is in a state now where he gets elected, and now they want to change the voter rules in the state. And he's got to run again in 2 years. And this is his freshman speech to Congress. Always a big moment for the senator, the first speech. And his speech was unbelievably interesting. So we're going to go here and listen to Warnock here.
We commit ourselves to the way of peace, an act of peace that prevents these kinds of tragedies from happening in the first place. We pray for these families.
So let's listen. This is
Mr. President,
one of the things I missed about being here every day, 5 days a week, is we'd always try to find the great speeches in American history and play pieces of them. And this turned out to be one of the great speeches. So since it's new, we're going to go ahead and play a bit of it. Here we go.
I'm here today as a proud American and as one of the newest members of the Senate in all of the journey that has brought me to these hallowed halls. With an abiding sense of reverence and gratitude for the faith and sacrifices of ancestors who paved the way. I am a proud son of the great state of Georgia, born and raised in Savannah, coastal city known for its cobblestone streets and verdant town squares. Towering oak trees, centuries old and covered in gray Spanish moss, stretch from one side of the street to the other, bend and beckon the lover of history and horticulture to this city by the sea. I was educated at Morehouse College, and I still serve in the pulpit of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, both in Atlanta, the cradle of the civil rights movement. And so like those oak trees in Savannah, My roots go down deep. They stretch wide. The soil of Waycross, Georgia, Burke County, Scriven County. The word I am Georgia, a living example and embodiment of its history and its hope, of its pain and promise, the brutality and possibility. Mr. President, at the time of my birth, Georgia's two senators were Richard B. Russell and Herman E. Talmadge, both arch segregationists and unabashed adversaries of the civil rights movement. After the Supreme Court's landmark Brown versus Board ruling outlawing school segregation, Talmadge warned that blood will run in the streets of Atlanta. Senator Talmadge's father, Eugene Talmadge, former governor of our state, had famously declared, "The South loves the Negro in his place. But his place is at the back door." When once asked how he and his supporters might keep Black people away from the polls, he picked up a scrap of paper and wrote a single word on it: pistols.
Remember that picture I showed you? That really happened.
Yet there is something in the American Covenant, in its charter documents, and its Jeffersonian ideal that bends toward freedom. Led by a preacher and a patriot named King, Americans of all races stood up. History vindicated the movement that sought to bring us closer to our ideals, to lengthen and strengthen the cords of our democracy. I now hold the seat, the Senate seat, where Herman E. Talmadge sat. That's why I love America. I love America because we always have a path to make it better, build a more perfect union. It is a place where a kid like me who grew up in public housing, first college graduate in my family, can now stand as a United States Senator. I had an older father. He was born in 1917. Serving in the Army during World War II, he was once asked to give up his seat to a young teenager while wearing his soldier's uniform. They said making the world safe for democracy. But he was never bitter. By the time I came along, he had already seen the arc of change in our country. He maintained his faith in God and in his family and in the American promise, and he passed that faith on to his children. My mother grew up in Waycross, Georgia. You know where that is? Way across Georgia. Like a lot of Black teenagers in the 1950s, she spent her summers picking somebody else's tobacco and somebody else's cotton. But because this is America, 82-year-old hands that used to pick somebody else's cotton went to the polls in January and picked her youngest son to be a United States Senator. Ours is a land where possibility is born of democracy. A vote.
Possibility is born of democracy. And that's really true. Possibility is born of democracy. I love that quote. Let's keep going.
A voice. A chance to help determine the direction of the country and one's own destiny within it. Possibility born of democracy. That's why this past November and January, my mom and other citizens of Georgia grabbed hold of that possibility and turned out in record numbers, 5 million in November, 4.4 million in January, far more than ever in our state's history.
And that's true in Utah too. Biggest election since 1900. I mean, it's 100 years since we've had an election as big as the one we just had, which should be celebrated.
Turnout for a typical runoff doubled. The people of Georgia sent their first African-American senator and first Jewish senator, my brother John Ossoff, to these hallowed halls. But then what happened? Some politicians did not approve of the choice made by the majority of voters in a hard-fought election in which each side got the chance to make its case to the voters. And rather than adjusting their agenda, rather than changing their message, they're busy trying to change the rules. We are witnessing right now a massive and unabashed assault on voting rights, unlike anything we've ever seen since the Jim Crow era.
And the Jim Crow era is that era right following the Civil War, where they made it impossible for the freed slaves and their children to vote. And that went on for over 100 years, and it's still happening in unique ways.
This is Jim Crow in new clothes. Since the January election, some 250 voter suppression bills have been introduced by state legislatures all across the country, from Georgia to Arizona, from New Hampshire to Florida, using the big lie of voter fraud as a pretext for voter suppression. The same big lie that led to a violent insurrection on this very Capitol the day after my election. Spent 24 hours, elected Georgia's first African-American Jewish senator. Hours later, the Capitol was assaulted. We see in just a few precious hours the tension very much alive in the soul of America. And the question before all of us at every moment is, what will we do to push us in the right direction? And so politicians driven by that big lie aim to severely limit and in some cases eliminate automatic and same-day voter registration, mail-in and absentee voting, and early voting and weekend voting. They want to make it easier to purge voters from the voting roll altogether. As a voting rights activist, I've seen up close just how draconian these measures can be. I hail from a state that purged 200,000 voters from the roll one Saturday night in the middle of the night. We know what's happening here. Some people don't want some people to vote. I was honored on a few occasions to stand with our hero and my parishioner, John Lewis.
Now, John Lewis was the guy that did the Pettus Bridge thing, that fight for people to to register to vote so they could vote, and was severely beaten. I think I've showed you those images, and he just passed away. But he was kind of like the voter rights guy after Martin Luther King died.
I was his pastor, but I'm clear he was my mentor.
And I should say, he's a preacher. He preaches at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King was the pastor. So that's what makes him so fundamentally important, is he's kind of like the person now that it's inherited. And John Lewis, the last person kind of the big five civil rights heroes, has passed away. And now he is kind of the next generation. And that's why his speech was considered a classic. There's one more line I want to share with you. I think we have time. Here we go.
On more than one occasion, we boarded buses together after Sunday church services as part of our Souls to the Polls program, encouraging the Ebenezer Church family and communities of faith to participate in the democratic process. Now, just a few months after Congressman Lewis's death, there are those in the Georgia legislature, some who even dare to praise his name, and are now trying to get rid of Sunday souls to the fold, making it a crime for people who pray together to get on a bus together in order to vote together. I think that's wrong. Matter of fact, I think that a vote is a kind of prayer.
I think a vote is a kind of prayer.
I mean, listen, people get all confused over this term, separation of church and state. You know what it means simply? Your government can't discriminate against your religion and can't treat your religion differently than they treat another. Does it mean people have to not talk about religion in the Senate? Do you know they start the Senate every day with a prayer? There's no separation of church and people. The only thing separation of church and state says is that the government can't discriminate against you and your religious beliefs. It doesn't say people have to stop being religious just because they become a US senator. And when you think about it, right, when you look at how many important civil rights movements have been started by churches, religion is very much alive. There is no separation of church and politics. That's what people decide to do based on their faith. And so for some people, a vote is a kind of prayer for the future of the country. It's important, it matters. It's a sacred obligation. We call it a sacred obligation as Americans, right? So I think that was just an interesting line. And he's obviously going to be, from here on in, probably one of the most important leaders in the country when it comes to letting everybody have an equal say and everybody having an equal vote. Well, listen, we're going to stop right there and let you guys think about that for a second. But this is one of the major issues going on in the country today that I decided we kind of maybe had to take some time and talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and just stop